So Jan, this is one of the great kind of technology stories. You start off with an idea. You actually came or got the idea from Point England School here in Auckland, Decile 1 School. Just take us through that story about how you met them and the challenge that they gave you.
Yeah, thanks. So we actually started life as one of the earliest Google Apps integrators in Asia Pac. We were the first Google reseller in the region, and the schools were some of our earliest customers. So initially schools were coming on because they wanted to get off of group-wise exchange and a whole host of solutions that entailed them paying for some on-site computers, which schools are not that keen on anymore. And Point England first was one of the earliest adopters of Google Apps. Google Apps is now the fastest growing solution in education by far. But 3-4 years ago when they were starting, they were really on a sort of the cutting edge. They came back about a year after getting set up, and we had this set of conversations about how it's going, what's working, what could we help with. And they came back with some interesting feedback, because they said, look, we love what it's doing for us. We love what it's doing for the students. We love the impact, the engagement. We love the outcomes. But it's becoming a little hard to manage. And the scenario they ran into basically was that if you're in a corporate setting, and imagine you're a manager and you have a shared drive that 30 employees drop everything they write into every day, right? Or if you're a secondary school teacher, a high school teacher, and you've got 250 people who drop everything they do in there every day, it becomes unmanageable fairly quickly. Effectively, teachers have an information management challenge that is in many ways unequal in a corporate world, right, in terms of the volume of information. So we've, for example, done some research that suggests that a secondary school teacher, a high school teacher, will have to touch somewhere between 30 and 50,000 pieces of content every year. I mean, it's staggering, the volume, right? And so what they were running into is that basic limitation in a system that was really geared at a corporate user who does not have anywhere near that level of volume. And so what we saw, we literally had a dinner, and over some wine in St. Helier somewhere, we were sitting and talking about this and sort of the challenges that teachers were starting to face. And we thought, well, I think we could do something about that. So let's have a chat and see what sorts of things we could do for teachers to make that easier. In the course of about, 4 or 5, maybe 6 months, kept coming back to this and kept going back and sitting at Point England actually at the school with the whiteboard and saying, well, what if it did this? And what if we presented it this way? And we ended up with this really a hack. That's really what it was to start with. And that hack turned out to be really powerful for the teachers. And within about a week, we had teachers from across the region starting to ping, saying, hey, we heard you're doing this really cool thing. Well, what is that? Can we see? Could we use this? And we effectively ended up being able to get on a really early stage of the Google wave. All right. So again, as I mentioned, Google is the most popular technology solution in education right now. It's growing at over 80% per annum. It is enormous. Right? And so what we're seeing is the demand curve, which is just accelerating, and it's been accelerating since we started. About 6 months in, at that point we had customers in about half a dozen countries. We were starting to see that growth really pick up. We had a demo for a large private school in India. And about 15 minutes into the demo, the headmaster said, just stop, I'm going to go back to my desk, I'm going to cut you a purchase order. How quickly can we get this in? And we had this collective epiphany after the call saying, okay, this is actually a lot easier than dealing with our corporate customers. Not that there's anything wrong with dealing with the corporate customers, but education is in many ways a front runner in a lot of technology, right? And we're seeing this with Google Apps, we're seeing this with Chromebooks and in other areas. But so what we ended up doing is shifting gears quite a bit more heavily towards education. Late last year, actually. In late 2011, we chanced across a call for invites to an incubator in Palo Alto, something called Imagine K-12. So Imagine K-12 is a spin-off from Y Combinator, and it's run by a couple of the same people. And it basically was the first incubator that was geared at education, ed tech, in the world. So we came across it late on Friday in New Zealand time, and because of the time zone alignment, it was due. The applications were closing on Friday U.S. time. So on Saturday morning here in New Zealand, Tony Nice, my co-founder, and I went to Point England, sat in those little chairs, and 60 takes later, we had our 1-minute video that we had to send in with our application. And much to our amazement, a few weeks later, we got told, hey, you're in for an interview. You made the first stage. And we were actually astounded. Right? This is not what we expected. This was a long shot, really.
Because one assumes they're getting thousands of recruiters.
Yeah. I mean, we thought, we're just doing this cool thing and it's working for us. But really, I'm sure people are doing much more interesting things elsewhere. So we made it through the interviews. Again, each step sort of with increasing astonishment, I guess, on our part, that here we are in New Zealand working with some local schools, and look at this innovation actually is getting recognized by some pretty top tier people. And in January last year, Tony and I got on a plane. As we sort of sat on the tarmac here in Auckland Airport, we looked at each other and we thought, what's the worst thing that can happen? Right? We'll go to California. We'll spend 3 months in this incubator. We'll learn heaps. We'll come back. And things just exploded. We ended up being one of the stronger entries in our batch. We had a huge amount of interest from investors. We closed an oversubscribed round late last year and have basically taken off globally in a major way.
Did you have any sense prior to entering this space as to what the education market actually entailed and where those opportunities lay?
So education is an interesting market in that if you look at clean tech, if you look at wireless power, if you look at, I don't know, any number of biotech things, most of us don't have any inkling for how these things work with the sciences, and therefore we have to seek expertise. Education is one of those things that we all have some expertise in because we've spent a good chunk of our lives in the educational system. However, it is also quite misleading in that the education system we've been in is different from the education system as it exists today. Right? So I think we approached education as an emerging opportunity, but without any preconceived notions. I mean, we didn't come into this wanting to revolutionize education, nor do we have those notions now. I mean, the basic epiphany for us was that a combination of things, right? That one is that education is experiencing a massive change, right? And that change is driven by changes in funding regimes. So funding for education globally is going down, and that's forcing schools to look at technology choices. It's forcing schools to adopt things that may have been out of their comfort zone just a few years ago. We're seeing shift in pedagogy and how you teach. So a shift away from students reading books from a sort of 18th, 19th century model of learning to students as generators of knowledge, generators of content. And there's a whole slew of sort of themes around it, around blended learning, et cetera, inverted classroom, so on and so forth. What we saw is an opportunity to really have a significant impact in terms of the operational efficiency for a teacher in a classroom. Because what you realize fairly quickly when you spend some time with teachers is that their working life is in many ways a death by 1,000 paper cuts. Right? They have a whole lot of tasks that are repeated every class, every day, that are just not made any easier by the existing technology. And so the experience for a lot of teachers and the hesitation that a lot of teachers have around technology is quite understandable, because if you had a history over your working life of being told, hey, here's the next solution that's going to make a big difference for you, go try it, and you go invest the time, you go learn about it, because as a teacher you don't get a lot of PD, you don't get a lot of professional development time. You get some, but it's not great, right? You're expected to be learning on your own time, by and large. So you invest the time and effort into these tools as they come along. And for teachers, it's not just learning about the tool, it's actually putting the time and effort. So if you're doing lesson planning, you have to put in the content. You have to provide a degree of personalization, so different groups of students get an experience that's more geared at them. So you put in this time and effort, and it may work for 3 months. And then one day you come into class and you find it's not working anymore, or the company folded, or your district is not paying for it anymore. And suddenly a massive amount of effort just goes out the window. And so as a teacher, when you go into your classroom and you find this technology you just spent a weekend putting together lesson plans for just isn't loading, or is having an error of some sort, you do this over and over and over, and you learn not to trust technology. And we'd all have the same experience. And so Google in many ways is fundamentally different, right? The one experience people consistently have with Google is just, it kind of works, right? That's what we all instinctively do when we test, is internet up on this machine? We load google.com. Did it load? Yep, internet's up. And so having technology that's robust, having technology that's reliable, makes a huge difference.
So just take us through what the software actually does that teachers missed before.
So our tools do a few things. First of all, we make it easier for teachers to see what's going on in their sort of online classroom. So students can engage with a whole set of different tools that all come bundled as part of the Google Apps for Education offering that schools sign up for. And I should point out that these are school-level solutions, right? So this is not students' personal Gmail. We don't touch Gmail. Schools don't touch personal Gmail. This is Google Apps as it's configured for the school at sort of an enterprise manner, much as corporates might use Gmail. So first of all, we make it easier for the teacher to see what's going on. So if you have students working, for example, on their assignments in their English or Algebra 2 folder, we make sure that those folders get created for the teachers and for the students. We make sure that things are shared the right way. We make sure that as a teacher, you can see the activity that's taking place, because it turns out for teachers, many times the activity is actually more important than content. So knowing that Timmy or Sally are working on the assignment or not working on the assignment is actually the first step before you engage with the content that they're producing. So we try and make it much easier for the teacher to see what's going on, where to engage, who's falling behind, so that as a teacher you can more selectively pick what's going on. The other thing we provide for teachers is more transparency. Right? So Google Apps, Microsoft, most of these cloud-based solutions that schools are embracing are really built around the notion of coworkers or colleagues in a corporate sense. And the relationship between a teacher and a student is fundamentally different. So we surface for the teacher the sorts of things that you may need to see as a teacher that are not probably as relevant in a corporate setting.
So how closely do you work with Google itself?
I think our relationship with Google can probably be best summed up as it's complicated. Right? It's we put very significant load on Google's servers. We're certainly in their top 3 largest global users of their APIs. We work very closely with their engineering teams around certainly anything that's not working well, features that are needed in the organizational sense, because many of the things that we generate or we deal with are equally important in the organizational context. They're not specific just to education in many ways. So again, we work with Google across many different teams, many different layers. And the thing I guess that's important to realize here is Google's not one coherent, cohesive entity. It is a number of organizations that work together in various ways. And yeah, I mean, we're on. In any sufficiently complicated system, some part of the system is always down. Right?
And how have you found the take-up? You were kind of born global, really, from day one?
The take-up was actually quite astounding. So what we hadn't appreciated coming into education, again, we didn't come into education on purpose, right? We didn't set out to build tools for education. We built them based on demand from schools we already worked with. What we hadn't appreciated is the global nature of education and the degree of connectivity between teachers, which is profound. Up until very, very recently, we had not made a single outbound call. Right? Entirety of our customer base came basically to us largely through word of mouth, through references, through conferences. And it is a global community in every sense of the word. We now have customers in over 30 countries. It's quite fascinating to watch these networks of influence where we pick up a school or a group of teachers and then it spreads. And you can almost directly trace that lineage.
So that conversation with the staff at Point England School that you had over the famous glass of wine in St Heliers really created something perhaps way bigger than you ever realised it would become.
It was hugely beyond what we expected. I mean, we at every step of the way, and every quarter, we continue to be astounded by the sort of inroads we're making.
What about the pickup in New Zealand itself?
New Zealand's great. So New Zealand schools are a little bit different from most of the world in the sense that they have much more independence than pretty much anywhere else in the world. We're also seeing huge uptake in Google Apps. The difference here, I suppose, is that in New Zealand, a large school might be 1,000, 2,000 students. A small school might be 50. In other places, particularly in the US, where we see the uptake, particularly at the district level, we might have a district bringing in 80 or 60,000 students at a time and bringing in sometimes hundreds of schools. So how we go about rolling out in countries varies quite a bit. But yeah, New Zealand and Australia both actually are picking up in a huge way.
So when you look at the need to adapt the product to different markets, different languages, has that created additional complications for you?
So we very much follow the Google model, right? Where we don't really have a philosophical layer. Right? We've worked quite hard to avoid creating any features that require a change in philosophy, a change in values, change in beliefs. Right? These are information management tools that work pretty much regardless of how you view pedagogy, how you view teaching and learning, which means that we really haven't hit any cultural sensitivity around what we do. Language is certainly something we look at, and we are working on internationalization as we speak. We're finding the uptake in English is significant in its own right.
And what about funding the business? You've been able to fund it all internally because effectively it's just about hiring software developers?
So we certainly started by just bootstrapping on our own, and that was great. When we got to California, we realized the opportunity was much, much greater. Right? And I guess that's been one of the key learnings in going out to the big, broader world, because one of the questions you start getting asked is, well, what is your total addressable market? Could it be bigger? Right? And this is one of the challenges I think a lot of New Zealand businesses have in looking at growth, because we tend to want to build the world's greatest X in New Zealand. Right? On a global scale, that's a family business, and interesting, but mildly so. Right? I think, and this is an experience I had talking to many New Zealand entrepreneurs who are looking outside of New Zealand, is we almost collectively need a permission to go global. Right? And so I think coming into California in particular, into Silicon Valley, the mindset very much is you're a global business, you're going to be number one. How are you going to get to number one at the global level? And so in order to achieve that, you do need sometimes significant investment, and that's the route we took. We ended up securing investment from some of the top investors in Silicon Valley, from investors in New York City, and from investors in Singapore.
And therefore, you also run a dual office situation. So you got R&D here in New Zealand, and you've got an operational office in Silicon Valley. How do you find that model works for you?
Right, not something I'd recommend for anybody, but sometimes you don't have a choice, right? And so having investors and having the sort of growth we're seeing in the U.S. in particular, we made the decision early on to shift our HQ to Palo Alto, which has worked out amazingly well. So all of our marketing, sales, and sort of core operations are in the U.S., and we've kept all of our R&D, well, most of our R&D in New Zealand. And that's It's worked well in some ways, but it's created the sort of challenges, communication challenges you might expect in having two offices and having to have people visit offices, etc.
Do you find that the competitive space is growing, or how much of a market dominance do you have with the product?
So we certainly now have competitors. We didn't 6 months ago, which is great. It provides a degree of validation. Right? It says this is a real space. There's real opportunity here. So I guess we don't see the competitors as so much of a threat as an opportunity. It's an opportunity to validate. It's an opportunity to provide a price point comparison. It's an opportunity to look at their strategy and say, what should we be doing differently? Is there something they're doing that resonates really well with customers that we need to be emulating or incorporating into our offerings as well?
And what about the development? Do you obviously speak to teachers regularly, and you enhance the offering simply based on their feedback and their input to that process?
So again, here's where we follow the Google model. Right? Google's model is that you don't have major releases, you have continuous updates, and that's very much what we do. We've tried very hard to incorporate those feedback loops into the core product. So right now, if you were to look at Teacher Dashboard as a teacher, what you'd find is on the bottom of every page, there's a little bar that says, how do we make this page better? Click here, type something, press enter. And we get a huge volume of feedback from teachers around a whole host of things, ranging from things I don't understand to things that are not working intuitively to things I'd really like to see added to this. And that's been great. That really is what drives our product development, our roadmap.
It must be difficult though, managing all of that feedback. How do you do that in a seamless sort of a way?
With difficulty. I don't think there's any silver bullets. I mean, we've had the very good fortune of working with people who are visionary, and that's what we look for. Is we look for educators who are going to help us build solutions that address next year's problems, not last year's problems, right? And therefore, that is what affects how we drive the product roadmap. Is we try to make sure we're ahead of the requirements, not behind.
Given that you were very early into this space and looking at your sort of futuristic hat on, where's this going to move to? Where could you see this sort of product in about 5 years' time? Because it's also having to keep up with a market that's changing as quickly as you're trying to keep up with it.
So Google's product roadmap extends to about 18 months. So for us to prognosticate what's going to happen in 5 years, I have no idea. Right? What we are betting on is some trends. Right? One of those trends is that education is moving to the cloud in a big way. Education is moving to one-to-one devices, to Chromebooks, Android, tablets, etc. That's unlikely to change. Teachers are going to be dealing with more content, not less content. So we are betting on those trends and being able to address the requirements that arise from those. Where we're going to be, it's really hard to predict. I mean, our success really is, we define success as being able to actually have an impact on teachers, right? It is very much about empowering teachers. I'd love to see a world where in 5 years there's nothing left to do. But that's probably fairly unlikely. So
yeah, everyone would like to be in that space. Obviously, this product is designed for teachers, but what about for student dashboards? Is there opportunities in that area as well too?
So there is a huge amount of R&D going into students and what do you put in front of students, right? And there's a couple of challenges. One is there are many more students than there are teachers, and so what you find is your scaling problems are much bigger. Right, you end up with having a Google level scaling issue. Us dealing with teachers, we're dealing with a much smaller audience. Right? So just at the level of technology, you're looking at different class of solutions. Secondly, when you're dealing with students, you're dealing with a very different audience, right? In terms of age groups, in terms of language, in terms of expectations, right? Those are in many ways very challenging problems, and you can look at Facebook's troubles in terms of trying to keep up with the younger students now. People who are no longer in Mark Zuckerberg's demographic, right, are a challenge, right? And Facebook is trying to deal with it as best as they can, but that is a really significant problem. The decision we'd made, again, early on is to say, well, actually, we don't put anything in front of students. Right? There's nothing of what we do that students actually see. What we might do is create the folders in Google Drive for them, create calendars, create Google Sites, blogs, Picasa albums, what have you. So the student experience is they go into Google Drive and they might see the folders we created for them. They might go into Google Calendar and see their class calendar. So they interact with Google, not with us. Right? So effectively, we're structuring their environment for them, but we're not getting in the way. And that, in fact, is a core strength, because it means that as a teacher, if you read in a blog some cool new Google feature you'd like to use tomorrow, you can walk into a class and start using it. We don't get in your way.
Where would you like to take things from here? Do you work to any sort of plan, or do you just let the market evolve and dictate it, and you just kind of ride the wave with it?
So we have certainly a product roadmap, which is really focused at the low-hanging fruit, right? Areas again where we're seeing opportunity to help teachers take some of the pain out of their day. We are seeing huge growth in terms of devices, so Chromebooks, etc., and a lot of our effort is geared at that. A lot of it is just working on the core product and saying, how do we do what we do right now and just improve that.
Now, this year you won the New York City Schools Gap Challenge. How much did that mean for you in terms of, I guess, recognition, and what's it done for the business as well?
That was great. So the Gap App Challenge was a culmination of an exercise that the New York City Department of Education went through, where they looked at hundreds of apps, looking for things that are likely to shift the needle in New York City for New York City students. And we were quite astounded where we were actually named the grand winner in the classroom management category. So we were one of 2 grand winners out of that effort, which is even more interesting given that New York City hasn't officially adopted Google Apps across the board. It's been great. It's been great in the sense it created a great deal of recognition globally. It allowed us to make huge inroads into New York City. New York City is a little bit like New Zealand in the sense that there is a Department of Education, but a lot of the decisions are devolved back to schools. Right? So yeah, I mean, it's been tremendously helpful in terms of visibility, in terms of credibility, and again, just direct contact on the ground in New York City.
And just finally, knowing what you know now, and you think back on your journey, what might you have changed along the way if you'd had a chance to know then what you know now?
Right. So probably something I touched on earlier, which is that permission to go big, right, is a big one. Right? I think there's a mentality that's entirely too common here, right, around needing permission to go big. We could have stepped on the accelerator a lot faster, a lot sooner. Part of this is realizing the value of some of the networks that exist outside of New Zealand, right? And the New Zealand government's doing a pretty good job, and it's doing a better job actually, of connecting New Zealand businesses outside. But that is critical. Right? One of the realizations we made after having gotten into Silicon Valley is that Silicon Valley is 4,000 people. Right? It's 4,000 people that are the venture capitalists, that are the CEOs, that are the board members that basically form what we call Silicon Valley. The value of Silicon Valley is not just the investment. It's not the fact that there are many, many, many people there who have the checkbook to write $1 million checks. It's the connections. It's the fact that they can pick up a phone and put you in touch with the right people overnight. Right? And that's much harder to do here. Right? So the value of the connections in Silicon Valley and elsewhere is tremendous. And that's something that's very hard to replicate anywhere else, including New Zealand.